You're paying, right? Laura's voice cut through the air like a sharpened blade, laughing loudly. 15 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. 15 people who had just devoured the finest steaks, lobster tails, and wines that cost more than the $200 monthly allowance my own husband gave me. 15 mouths were now waiting for my answer, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. I smiled back. I opened my purse slowly, and then I said something no one expected to hear. But let me tell you how I got to that moment. Sitting at the Gilded Lily, a downtown restaurant where the bill for a single table was approaching $8,000. Welcome to my channel. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and gave my video a like. Now let's jump into the story. I'm sure you'll enjoy it till the end. It all started 3 days earlier. Fernando, my husband, appeared at the door of the tiny converted storage room where I now lived. Yes, a storage room, because I no longer lived in my house. Well, technically it was still my house, but that's another story I'll tell you in a moment. Fernando knocked twice. "Patricia, you in there?" His voice sounded cheerful, almost forced. I opened the door, and there he was, with that smile I'd known since our wedding day. But now that smile was accompanied by something else, something I had learned to recognize over the past 8 months. Guilt. "Patricia, I've got some wonderful news." He walked in without waiting for an invitation. He looked around the 10 by 10 foot room where I now spent my days. A twin bed, a chair, a small dresser, a window overlooking the back alley. "We're having a family dinner, something small and casual, just to celebrate Miss Loretta's birthday," he said. Loretta Whitaker, Laura's mother, a woman I had seen exactly 3 times in 2 years. "It's just a regular dinner, Patricia, nothing extravagant, but it would mean a lot to Laura if you were there." Something tightened in my chest. Family dinner. It had been so long since I'd heard those words directed at me with real affection. "When is it?" I asked, even though I already knew I would say yes. I always said yes when Fernando asked me for anything. That's how it had been our whole marriage. "This Saturday at 8 at the Gilded Lily, that French place downtown." The Gilded Lily. I had walked past that place once, the red velvet curtains, the chandeliers sparkling through the glass, people going in wearing jewelry that cost more than a used car. "Are you sure, Fernando? That place must be really expensive." Fernando laughed, that laugh that used to be warm when we first met. "Patricia, don't you worry about that. It's a special occasion. Besides, we're family." Family. That word echoed in my ears long after Fernando left. I sat on the bed and looked out the window. The alley was dark, even though it was barely 6 in the evening. From there, I could hear the sounds of the main house, my house, the house that I had purchased with my own inheritance and investments. 8 months had passed since that afternoon. Back then, I was living peacefully in the home I had purchased with my inheritance, money my parents had left me after a lifetime of careful saving, combined with 20 years of my own investments. The estate wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. 4 spacious bedrooms with high ceilings and crown molding, each one filled with furniture I'd selected piece by piece over the years. A sunroom with French doors that opened onto the garden, where morning light streamed through and made everything feel like a painting. Old pecan trees stood guard in the backyard, their branches spreading wide like protective arms. They'd been there longer than I had, and I'd always found comfort in their permanence. The kitchen was my pride. Marble countertops I had personally selected from 3 different suppliers until I found exactly the right veining, exactly the right shade of cream, with delicate gold threads running through the stone. I'd spent hours in that kitchen, cooking meals for Fernando when we were newlyweds, imagining the family dinners we'd host, the life we'd build together in this beautiful space. That afternoon started like any other. I was in the sunroom reading when I heard Fernando's car pull into the driveway, followed by another car I recognized as Laura's.
My stepdaughter rarely visited, so seeing both of them arrive together made my stomach tighten with something I couldn't name. Not worry exactly, just awareness. They came in through the front door, Fernando calling out, "Patricia! Honey, we're here! We need to talk to you about something important." We sat at the dining room table, my dining room table, the one I inherited from my mother, its mahogany surface polished to a deep shine. Laura sat across from me, looking professional in a tailored suit, her hair pulled back severely. She placed a leather briefcase on the table with a soft thud that seemed too loud in the quiet room. Fernando sat beside me, and I noticed he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. He took my hand instead, his palm slightly damp. Laura pulled out documents, spreading them across my mother's table. "Patricia, Dad and I have been consulting with estate planners," she began, her voice smooth and confident. "We've learned some concerning things about the new tax laws. If anything were to happen to you, and we're not saying it will, of course, but if it did, the tax burden would be devastating. The government would take almost everything. Dad could lose this house." I felt my chest tighten. Lose the house? The home I'd bought? Fernando squeezed my hand. "The solution is simple, honey. If you add Laura to the deed now, we avoid all those problems. It's just paperwork. You keep living here, just like always. Nothing changes. We're just protecting what we've built together." Laura leaned forward, her voice warm, almost sisterly. "We're just protecting what we've built together as a family. You, Dad, and me. This way, no matter what happens, this house stays in the family. Isn't that what we all want?" I looked down at the papers. Legal language swam before my eyes, words like joint tenancy and right of survivorship and transfer of deed. My parents had always handled financial matters, and after they passed, I'd managed on my own, but this felt beyond me. Complex. Important. "And if I put Laura's name on the deed," I said slowly, trying to understand, "it really doesn't change anything for me?" Laura smiled, and it was such a warm smile, showing all her perfect white teeth. "Of course not, Patricia. This is your home. It always will be. It's just a legal formality, a protection. You'll still live here, still make all the decisions. The only difference is that on paper, we're protecting the asset from government seizure." I looked at Fernando, my husband, the man I had married 3 years ago after my first husband passed. The man who had seemed so kind, so attentive, so loving. He was looking at me now with pleading eyes, his hand still holding mine. "It would give me such peace of mind, Patricia, knowing that if anything happened to you, I wouldn't lose this place. Knowing that we had taken care of everything properly." Something flickered in my chest. Doubt, maybe, or intuition. A small voice that said, "Wait, think about this. Talk to someone else first." But louder than that voice was my desire to be a good wife, to be part of a family, to show Fernando and Laura that I trusted them, that we were truly united. "All right," I heard myself say, "if you both say it's best." Laura produced a pen, expensive looking, heavy in my hand. She pointed to lines marked with yellow tabs. "Just sign here, and initial here." My hand moved across the paper. Patricia Hambly. Patricia Hambly. P.H. I signed. I signed because I trusted. I signed because he was my husband. I signed because I thought marriage meant something. I signed because I believed that family meant protection, not predation. Laura gathered the papers quickly, sliding them back into her briefcase with a satisfied snap. "Thank you, Patricia. You've made a very wise decision. Dad and I will get these filed right away." They left within 15 minutes, both of them suddenly in a hurry. Fernando kissed my cheek, a dry, brief touch, and Laura gave me a quick hug that felt stiff and performative. I sat alone at my mother's dining room table for a long time after they left, looking out through the sunroom doors at the pecan trees swaying in the late afternoon breeze. That signature would change everything, but I wouldn't realize it until it was too late.
2 weeks after I signed, Laura knocked on my bedroom door. It was still my bedroom then, the master bedroom with the bay window overlooking the garden, the walk-in closet where my clothes hung in neat rows, the ensuite bathroom with the clawfoot tub I'd found at an estate sale years ago. I was reading in bed when I heard the knock. "Come in," I called, expecting Fernando. Laura walked in without waiting for a response, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She sat on my bed without asking, right on top of the quilt my mother had made, her weight creating a depression in the mattress that pulled me slightly toward her. "Patricia, I have exciting news." Her voice was bright, almost giddy. "Dad and I have been talking, and we've decided to remodel the house. We're going to modernize it. New fixtures, updated paint, maybe refinish these old floors. It's going to be beautiful." I sat up straighter, confused. Remodel? But I like the house the way it is. Laura waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, it's lovely, of course, but it needs updating. The problem is, there's going to be a lot of noise and construction dust for a while. We don't want it to affect you, with your age and everything. All that dust can't be good for your lungs." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What are you suggesting?" "Well, Dad and I thought you could stay in the converted storage room for a few months, just while we finish up. You remember it, right? Out back? We've already set it up for you. It has everything you need. A bed, a small bathroom. You'll be very comfortable, and you won't have to deal with all the construction mess." The converted storage room, that 10 by 10 foot space where I'd kept Christmas decorations, old suitcases, boxes of books I meant to donate. For how long? Laura shrugged, examining her manicured nails. 2, maybe 3 months maximum. You know how these things go. Contractors are always running behind schedule, but it'll be worth it. The house is going to look gorgeous when we're done. Can I just stay in one of the other bedrooms? They're all going to be torn up during the work. Trust me, the storage room is the best option. We've already moved your essentials out there. Why don't you go take a look? I walked out to the back of the property with a growing sense of dread. The converted storage room sat at the far corner of the yard, tucked behind the detached garage. It had been converted years ago by the previous owner, just enough to be considered livable, but barely. When I opened the door, my breath caught. A twin bed had been pushed against one wall, made up with sheets I didn't recognize. A small cracked mirror hung over a sink in the corner. One window, small and high, looked out over the back alley where trash bins lined up on collection days. The bathroom was barely functional. A toilet, a shower stall so narrow I'd have to turn sideways to use it. This was 10 by 10 feet of space. This was where they expected me to live. "It's just temporary," Laura said from behind me, making me jump. I hadn't heard her follow me. "You'll barely notice the time passing." Those 2 months turned into 8. The remodeling was never finished. Every time I asked Fernando when I could return to the main house, there was always something more to do. The floors needed another coat of sealant. The painters had to come back. They were waiting on a special order for cabinet hardware. There was always another reason, another delay, another week or 2. Little by little, without me realizing exactly when it happened, I stopped being the owner of the house and became the tenant of the tiny room out back. The financial control came next, subtle at first. Fernando sat me down one evening in my cramped quarters, perched awkwardly on the edge of my twin bed because there was nowhere else to sit. He said, "Patricia, we need to talk about household expenses. With all the renovation costs, money's tight. We're going to need to cut back on your monthly allowance, just temporarily. Maybe $200 a month for your personal expenses until we get things sorted." $200. To cover toiletries, clothes,
any food beyond the minimal groceries they allowed me to take from the main house kitchen, and even that felt like I was stealing the way Laura watched me when I came in for meals. Meanwhile, through my small window, I watched my old life continue without me. I saw Laura driving a new luxury car, a sleek black sedan that cost more than most people made in a year. I saw Fernando leaving for work in expensive suits I'd never seen before, Italian leather shoes gleaming. On Friday nights, I heard laughter floating across the yard from the main house. I saw the warm glow of lights in my dining room, caught glimpses through the windows of dinner parties where guests ate on my china, drank from my crystal glasses. When I tried to talk to Fernando about returning to the house, about increasing my allowance, he'd mumble something about just a few more weeks and cite maintenance costs as the reason money was tight. He'd avoid eye contact, shuffle his feet, find an excuse to leave within minutes. His moral cowardice was complete. He knew what they were doing to me, but he was too weak to stop it, too selfish to care more about me than his own comfort. I spent my days in that tiny room, making it stretch, making myself smaller to fit inside it. I washed my clothes in the sink because I didn't want to ask to use the washing machine in the main house. I ate sparingly, trying to make my $200 last the month. I sewed torn seams in my dresses by hand because I couldn't afford new clothes.
3 days before the dinner, Fernando appeared at my door again. It was a Saturday morning, and I was hand-washing a blouse in my tiny sink when I heard his knock. 2 quick raps that somehow sounded both cheerful and guilty at the same time. "Patricia, you in there?" His voice had that forced brightness I'd come to recognize, the tone he used when he wanted something but didn't want to admit it. I dried my hands and opened the door. There he was, with that smile, the one that used to make my heart flutter when we first married. Now, it just made me wary. "Patricia, I've got some wonderful news." He walked in without waiting for an invitation, looking around my 10 by 10 foot prison as if seeing it for the first time. His eyes skated over the twin bed, the cramped bathroom, the window overlooking the alley, but he said nothing about any of it. "We're having a family dinner, something small and casual, just to celebrate Miss Loretta's birthday." My chest tightened at those words. Family dinner. It had been so long since I'd heard those words directed at me with any real affection. 8 months of isolation, of being treated like an inconvenient guest in my own home, and now suddenly I was being invited to a family dinner? "Miss Loretta?" I asked. Loretta Whitaker? Laura's mother? A woman I had met exactly 3 times in the 2 years since Fernando and I married. "It's just a regular dinner, Patricia. Nothing extravagant, but it would mean a lot to Laura if you were there." He shifted his weight, hands in his pockets. "It would mean a lot to me." I knew I would say yes. I always said yes when Fernando asked me for anything. That's how it had been our whole marriage. Me trying to prove I was worth keeping, worth loving, worth including. "When is it?" I asked, even though part of me screamed that this was a mistake. "This Saturday at 8 at the Gilded Lily, that French place downtown." The Gilded Lily? I had walked past that restaurant once, years ago, pressed my face close to the windows like a child at a toy store. Red velvet curtains, crystal chandeliers that threw rainbow light across white tablecloths, people going in wearing jewelry that caught the light, coats that looked like they cost more than used cars. "Are you sure, Fernando? That place must be really expensive." He laughed, and for a moment it almost sounded genuine, like the laugh from when we were newlyweds. "Patricia, don't you worry about that. It's a special occasion. Besides, we're family." Family. That word echoed in my ears long after Fernando left, long after I heard his footsteps crossing the yard back to the main house. I sat on my twin bed and looked out the window. The alley was dark, even though it was barely 6 o'clock in the evening, shadows from the neighboring buildings cutting off the light. From where I sat, I could hear sounds from the main house, my house, the television playing, Laura's voice calling something to Fernando, the familiar creak of floorboards I had walked on for years before they exiled me. I thought about the house I had purchased with my inheritance, the home where I'd planned to build a life with Fernando, the sunroom where we'd drink coffee on weekend mornings, the garden where we'd plant vegetables together, the kitchen where I'd teach him my mother's recipes. All of it gone, replaced by this, a storage room and an allowance that barely covered necessities. But maybe, I thought, maybe this dinner meant something was changing. Maybe they were finally ready to welcome me back. The days leading up to Saturday crawled by. I only had one outfit suitable for a place like the Gilded Lily, a navy blue dress I'd bought years ago for special occasions, classic enough that it wouldn't look too dated. I found a small tear in the hem and spent an evening mending it by lamplight, my stitches careful and invisible. I polished my mother's pearl earrings with a soft cloth until they glowed. I shined my black heels with the last of an old tin of polish, buffing them until I could see my reflection in the leather. Limited resources, but I was determined to maintain my dignity. Saturday arrived with clear skies and unusually warm weather. I dressed carefully in my small room, every movement deliberate. I styled my graying hair in an elegant updo, using pins I'd had since before my first marriage. I applied lipstick, the good one I saved for special occasions, and looked at myself in the cracked mirror hanging over the sink. A 52-year-old woman stared back at me. Fine lines around the eyes, deeper creases around the mouth. Hands that had washed too many dishes in cold water, sewn too many repairs by dim light. But there was still dignity in that face, still strength. Fernando picked me up at 7:30. The drive downtown was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the occasional click of his turn signal. I noticed his watch, something new, expensive, with a face that caught the streetlights. His suit was designer, perfectly tailored. The contrast between us was stark. Him in his luxury, me in my carefully maintained but aging dress. When we pulled up to the Gilded Lily, my heart began to pound. Valet parking attendants in crisp uniforms, well-dressed couples emerging from luxury cars, the gleaming entrance with its brass fixtures and that red velvet I remembered from years ago. This was no small casual dinner. Inside the restaurant was even more breathtaking than I remembered. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths so crisp that they looked like snow. Servers moved silently in elegant black uniforms. The soft murmur of wealthy diners created a sound like distant waves. And there, at a long table in the center of the dining room, sat 15 people. 15. Not the intimate family gathering Fernando had described. Laura's friends, her colleagues, people in designer clothes and jewelry that caught the chandelier light. At the head of the table sat Miss Loretta, Laura's mother, a woman I had met exactly 3 times in the 2 years since Fernando and I married. Laura spotted me and waved, her smile bright and false. "Patricia, you made it! Come, sit here." She gestured to a chair at the far end of the table, tucked almost behind a decorative pillar. The seat for someone who doesn't matter. The seat where you put the guest you invited out of obligation. I sat down, my hands folded in my lap. The menus arrived. Heavy, leather-bound, with no prices listed. When restaurants don't list prices, it means everything is expensive. I watched the others order without hesitation. Lobster thermidor, Wagyu beef, bottles of wine with French names I couldn't pronounce. The server came to me, pen poised. "Just a Caesar salad, please," I said quietly. Laura's laugh rang out like a bell. "Oh, Patricia, don't be shy. This is a celebration. Order whatever you want." But I knew what was coming. I could feel it in the way Laura kept glancing at me, in the way Fernando refused to meet my eyes, in the way this entire evening felt like a performance, a stage being carefully set for something. So I made small talk when spoken to, I smiled politely at the strangers around me, and I watched. 15 people devoured the most expensive items on the menu. Wine bottles emptied and were replaced with new ones. Appetizers came and went. Oysters, caviar, foie gras. Main courses arrived on pristine white plates. Rare steaks, butter-poached lobster, duck confit. Dessert was a production. Flaming cherries jubilee, towering chocolate constructions, cheese plates with fruits I'd only seen in magazines. I ate my Caesar salad slowly, watching the bill climb higher and higher with each course, each bottle, each indulgence. Then the server appeared with a leather folder. The check. Laura reached for it immediately, opened it, and I saw her eyes scan the total. Something shifted in her expression. Triumph mixed with cruelty, like a cat that's finally cornered a mouse. She slid the folder across the table toward me, and in the moment before she spoke, time seemed to slow. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, could see every face beginning to turn in my direction. Then Laura's voice cut through the restaurant, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, her laugh following like an aftershock. "You're paying, right?" 15 pairs of eyes turned to me. 15 mouths stopped mid-conversation. 15 people waiting to see what I would do. The trap had been sprung.
The leather folder sat in front of me, cream-colored with gold embossing. I could see the edge of the bill inside. Thick paper, the kind expensive restaurants use. Laura's laugh still echoed in my ears, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers, carrying to the tables around us where other diners had stopped their conversations to watch. I opened my small purse slowly. The clasp made a soft click that seemed impossibly loud. I pulled out my wallet, worn leather, softened by years of use, and opened it so everyone could see inside. A single $10 bill, some change in the coin pocket. That was all. "Laura," I said, and my voice was calmer than I expected, steady and clear enough to carry through the suddenly quiet restaurant. "I have $10. This is all I have. This is all I've had since you and Fernando cut my allowance to $200 a month." Laura's smile flickered. Fernando shifted in his seat, still refusing to meet my eyes. I continued, my voice gaining strength. 8 months ago, I signed papers that put my home, the home I purchased with my own money, my inheritance, in Laura's name. I was told it was for tax protection. I was told nothing would change. Gasps rippled from nearby tables. I could feel eyes on me, but I kept my gaze on Laura, watching the color rise in her cheeks. 2 weeks later, I was moved into a 10 by 10 foot converted storage room. I've been living there ever since. I looked at Ms. Loretta then, saw her face drain of color, her hand rising to her mouth, while Laura and Fernando lived in my house, spending my money, hosting parties with my china. Laura's face turned crimson. She stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound like a scream. "How dare you? How dare you embarrass me like this?" Fernando reached for her arm weakly. "Patricia, please, you're making a scene." "Making a scene? This is ridiculous. This old woman is lying. She's delusional." She looked around at the shocked faces, at the phones some diners had pulled out, at Ms. Loretta's horrified expression, and I could see her losing control, could see the panic behind her rage. "Call the manager."
Her voice became shrill, desperate. She pointed at me with a shaking finger. "This old woman shouldn't even be here. She's disrupting our celebration. She's making up lies to ruin my mother's birthday." Fernando stood beside her, and in that moment, I saw his cowardice fully revealed. "Yes," he said, his voice thin and reedy. "Get her out of here. She's causing problems." A tall man in an impeccable black suit began weaving through the tables toward us. Laura saw him, and her confidence seemed to return, her posture straightening. "Finally," she announced to the restaurant at large, "I want this woman removed immediately." The manager's face was unreadable as he approached, his expression professionally neutral. Other diners watched openly now, some with phones raised, filming. Laura's voice grew louder with each step he took. "Do you know who I am? Do you know how much money we just spent here? I demand—" The manager reached our table, but instead of looking at Laura, instead of acknowledging her demands, he turned directly to me. His face softened, and when he spoke, his voice was respectful, almost gentle. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry for this disturbance. How would you like to handle these guests?" Silence fell over the entire restaurant. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to stop. Laura's mouth hung open, her fingers still pointing at me, frozen in mid-accusation. "What?" The word came out as a whisper. "What did you just say?" The manager kept his attention on me. "Mrs. Hambly, your usual table wasn't available tonight, which is why you're seated here. But I want to ensure you're comfortable. Should I call you a car?" Fernando stammered. "Mrs. Hambly? You know her?" The manager finally looked at them, and his expression had changed from warm to glacial. "Mrs. Hambly has been a patron of the Gilded Lily for over 15 years. She's also one of the original investors in this establishment. I recognized her the moment she walked in tonight." I had invested part of my inheritance in this restaurant years ago when it was just being planned, when the owners needed capital and offered partnership stakes. I'd never mentioned it to Fernando. It was from before we met. Part of my financial life I'd kept separate. The quarterly dividends deposited directly into my personal account, modest but steady. Laura's voice came out strangled. But she only has $10. She ordered a salad." The manager's voice turned cold. "Mrs. Hambly has a permanent account with us. She never needs to carry cash here. She ordered modestly tonight because that's her character, unlike some guests who order extravagantly, expecting others to pay." Ms. Noretta stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. Her face was a mixture of horror and rage, but the rage wasn't directed at me. "Laura, what have you done?" I finally spoke, standing slowly, gathering what remained of my dignity around me like armor. "I came tonight because my husband said it was a family dinner. I see now what kind of family this really is." I looked directly at Laura, then at Fernando. "You wanted me to pay? You set this trap thinking you'd humiliate me one final time?" I felt tears prick my eyes, but refused to let them fall. "The manager will note that my investment account will not be covering this bill." I picked up the letter folder and looked at the total for the first time. $8,247.83. I placed it deliberately in front of Laura. "You ordered it, you pay for it." The manager offered me his arm, and I took it. We walked toward the exit together, my head high, my steps steady. Behind me, I heard chaos erupting, Laura's voice rising in panic, the sound of her frantically opening her purse, Fernanda's silence, and Ms. Loretta's voice demanding answers. As we reached the door, I glanced back one final time. Laura's face had gone completely pale, her hands shaking as she pulled credit cards from her wallet. Fernando sat motionless, staring at the tablecloth, and Ms. Loretta stood over them both, her expression transforming from shock to something that looked very much like determination. The manager held the door open for me. "Your car will be here momentarily, Mrs. Hambly, and might I say, it's been too long since we've seen you. Your table will always be available." I stepped out into the cool night air, leaving behind the restaurant, the humiliation they'd planned for me, and, I hope, the life they'd tried to steal.
I stood outside the Gilded Lily, the evening air cool on my face, carrying the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen.
My hands were shaking slightly, not from cold, but from adrenaline, from the confrontation that had just played out under those crystal chandeliers. The manager stood beside me, a protective presence. "Mrs. Hambley, I've called you a car. Please wait here. Can I get you anything? Water? A seat?" I shook my head, unable to speak yet. My throat felt tight, my chest constricted. I had done it. I had exposed them. But now what? The restaurant door burst open, and Miss Loretta rushed out, her elegant emerald dress swishing around her legs, her silver hair slightly disheveled. "Mrs. Hambley! Patricia! Please, wait!" I tensed, expecting more conflict, more accusations, more humiliation. My body prepared to defend itself again. But when I turned to face her, I saw that Miss Loretta's face was stricken with genuine horror. Tears streaked her carefully applied makeup, and her hands reached for mine with a desperation that seemed real. "I had no idea," her voice broke on the words. "I swear to you, I had no idea what my daughter had done." I stood frozen, not trusting this, not after everything. "Laura told me this was a celebration dinner," Loretta continued, her words tumbling out. "She said you were doing well, that you and Fernando had downsized by choice, that you preferred a smaller space for easier maintenance. She made it sound like you were happy." She gripped my hands tighter. "I would never have let this happen if I'd known. What they've done, Patricia, what they've done is criminal." Something in her voice, in her eyes, convinced me she was telling the truth. I felt my own tears start to fall. "After you left," Loretta said, "Laura tried to pay the bill. Her credit card was declined. She'd been living beyond her means. All those expensive clothes, that car, all of it on credit. Fernando claimed he'd forgotten his wallet." Forgotten. As if this wasn't planned from the start. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "I paid it. I used my credit card and had to leave a piece of jewelry as additional collateral until the charge clears." She saw my expression and shook her head firmly. "I paid because I won't let my daughter's crimes reflect on me. But she and I will be having a very different conversation after this. A very different relationship, I suspect." The car the manager had called pulled up to the curb, but Loretta didn't release my hands. "Patricia, where are you staying tonight? Surely not back in that storage room." I looked down at our joined hands. I have nowhere else to go." "Absolutely not." Loretta's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "You're coming home with me. I have plenty of space, and I insist. Send that car away, manager. I'm driving Mrs. Hambley myself." My eyes filled with tears. Real tears this time. Not from humiliation, but from the first genuine kindness I'd received in 8 months. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Loretta drove me to her home in a quiet neighborhood I'd never visited, an elegant 2-story house with warm lights glowing in the windows. Inside, everything was tasteful and comfortable, lived in but well-maintained, the home of someone who valued quality over showiness. She showed me to a guest room on the 2nd floor, opening the door to reveal a real bed with a quilted coverlet, clean linens that smelled of lavender, a private bathroom with fluffy towels folded on the rack. "This is yours for as long as you need it. No time limit, no conditions. You need a place to stay while we figure this out, and I need to do something right after my daughter did so much wrong." I broke down then, really broke down, sinking onto the edge of the bed with my face in my hands. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Loretta sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders. "Because what happened to you is wrong. Because I'm ashamed my daughter was involved. Ashamed, and angry and horrified. And because no one should suffer what you have suffered." Later, we sat in her kitchen over cups of tea, and I told her everything. The manipulation at the dining room table, the papers I'd signed, the exile to the storage room 2 weeks later, the 8 months of living on $200 while they threw parties in my house. Loretta listened, her expression growing darker with each detail. "This isn't just morally wrong," she said when I finished. "This is elder abuse. This is fraud. Patricia, we need to take legal action. I don't know if I have the strength, I admitted. The thought of court, of lawyers, of facing Fernando and Laura again felt overwhelming. Loretta took my hand across the table. Then borrow mine. I know an excellent attorney, Marcus Chen. He specializes in estate law and elder abuse cases. We're going to get your house back, Patricia, and we're going to make sure Laura and Fernando face consequences for what they've done. You're not alone anymore. That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in 8 months. Clean sheets that didn't smell of mildew, soft pillows that cradled my head, a door with a lock that was mine to control. I cried myself to sleep, but they were strange tears. Relief mixed with grief, hope mixed with exhaustion, rage mixed with something that might have been peace. I woke to sunlight streaming through real curtains, not the dim light of the alley. The smell of coffee drifted up from downstairs, rich and welcoming. That afternoon, Loretta drove me to Marcus Chen's law office in a professional building downtown, all glass and steel reflecting the afternoon sun. We rode the elevator to the 8th floor in silence, my stomach tight with nerves. Marcus was in his late 40s, sharp-eyed behind wire-rimmed glasses, with the kind of focused attention that made you feel truly heard. His office walls were covered with law degrees from prestigious universities and commendations for elder advocacy work, awards with words like justice and protection engraved in brass. He listened to my entire story without interrupting, taking detailed notes in precise handwriting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and asked questions that cut straight to the heart of the matter. When exactly did you sign? Who witnessed it? Where was it notarized? Did you have independent legal counsel present? Each question felt like a small weight added to my chest. I signed without a lawyer present, I admitted, shame heating my face. They said it was just a formality. I trusted them. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Not judgment, but determination. We need to prove 3 things: undue influence, lack of independent counsel, and fraudulent intent. Do you have any documents? The original deed, purchase records, bank statements? I thought of the storage room, of the life I'd been forced into. I kept some papers in a box. Old deeds, receipts from when I bought the house. They're still in the storage room, I think, under the bed. We need those documents, Marcus said. They're crucial evidence. The thought of returning to that house, to that room, made my hands go cold. Loretta must have seen it in my face because she immediately said, "You're not going alone. I'm coming with you." Marcus advised us carefully. Get in, get your documents, get out. Don't engage with them beyond what's necessary. And document everything with your phone. The living conditions, the space, anything that shows what they forced you to endure. The next morning, Loretta and I drove to the estate. My hands shook as we turned onto the familiar street. As the house came into view, my house, with its 4 bedrooms and sunroom and pecan trees, now occupied by people who had stolen it from me. Laura's car was gone, but Fernando's sat in the driveway like an accusation. We walked around to the back, to the converted storage room tucked behind the garage. My key still worked. The lock turned with a click that sounded like a verdict. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, Loretta right behind me. In the daylight streaming through the small window, the room looked even worse than I remembered. The 10 by 10 space, the twin bed with its thin mattress, the cracked mirror, the bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. Loretta's face hardened with anger. This is inhumane. Patricia, you lived here for 8 months? I nodded, unable to speak, and knelt beside the bed. The box was still there, pushed far underneath where I'd hidden it. I pulled it out, opened it with trembling fingers. Yellowed papers, original receipts, bank statements showing the wire transfers for the house purchase. And there,
the original deed showing me as sole owner. Patricia. I froze. Fernando's voice came from the doorway. I turned to see him standing there, his expression shifting from surprise to nervousness to something that might have been guilt. What are you doing here? Who is this? Loretta stood up to her full height, her voice cold and clear. I'm Loretta Whitaker, and I'm witnessing the conditions you've forced your wife to live in. Fernando stammered. This is temporary. We've been renovating. Patricia, come inside. Let's talk about this reasonably. Something broke free inside me. My voice was stronger than I expected. Reasonably? Fernando, you stole my house. You exiled me to a storage room. You gave me $200 a month while living in luxury in my home. It was Laura's idea, he said quickly, desperately. I just wanted to protect the family assets. By stealing from me? By betraying your own wife? His face crumpled. I'll talk to Laura. We can fix this. We can put the house back in your name. No lawyers needed. We're family, Patricia. I picked up my box of documents and stood. We were never family. Family doesn't do this to each other. Back at Marcus's office, he examined the documents with the intensity of a jeweler inspecting diamonds. The original deed showing me as sole owner, the new deed with both my name and Laura's. He studied the notary seal on the fraudulent transfer, then picked up his phone and made several calls while Loretta and I waited. When he hung up, his expression had changed completely. The notary who certified your deed transfer had their license suspended 3 months before your signing date. I felt the room tilt. What does that mean? It means the notarization is invalid. The entire transfer is legally void. Marcus looked at me directly. Patricia, legally speaking, the house never stopped being yours, but we need a court order to make it official and enforceable. I could barely breathe. So I can get it back? We're going to get it back. That evening, Fernando called Loretta's house. I don't know how he got the number. His voice came through the speakerphone, pleading and desperate. Patricia, please, Laura and I talked. We'll voluntarily transfer the house back. No court needed. We can do it this week. We'll sign whatever papers you want. Marcus, listening beside me, shook his head firmly. I understood then what Fernando was really asking for, a way to avoid consequences, to make this disappear quietly. You want to avoid the legal consequences. You want to steal from me and then graciously give it back when you're caught and have everyone call it a family matter. We're family, Fernando said. We can work this out privately. I surprised myself with how firm my voice was. No, Fernando. I want the court to decide. I want a judge to hear what you did. You don't get to steal everything from me and then act like returning it makes you noble. Patricia, I'm filing the lawsuit. You'll hear from my attorney. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt stronger than I had in months. Marcus filed the motion to nullify the deed transfer the next day, along with charges of elder abuse and fraud. I had to give a deposition, reliving the entire nightmare while a court reporter typed every word. It was painful, humiliating to repeat it all. But Loretta sat beside me the entire time, her hand in mine. 3 weeks later, Marcus called us into his office. The court date is set, 3 weeks from today. He looked at me seriously. They're going to fight this. Be prepared for them to attack your character, your memory, your mental state. Their attorney will try to paint you as confused, forgetful, maybe even vindictive. I thought about the storage room, the $200, the dinner at the Gilded Lily. Let them try. I have the truth, and I have you both. Loretta squeezed my hand. And you have your strength back.
The night before court, I barely slept. I lay in Loretta's guest room, staring at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as car headlights swept past outside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Fernando's face at that dining room table, saw myself signing the papers that had stolen my life.
In the morning, Loretta helped me choose what to wear. A simple but dignified dress in charcoal bray, my mother's pearl necklace and earrings. "You look strong," she said, adjusting the collar. "You look like someone who deserves justice." Marcus called with final instructions. "Just tell the truth, answer only what's asked. Don't let them provoke you into anger or tears. You're the victim here, but you need to be a strong victim, a credible one." I reviewed my testimony one more time, my hands shaking with nerves and anticipation, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. The county courthouse was an imposing building with marble steps that seemed to go on forever. News crews clustered outside. Someone had tipped them off about the estate fraud case. I saw Fernando and Laura cross the plaza with their attorney, a sharp-dressed man carrying an expensive briefcase. Laura looked angry and defiant in a power suit. Fernando looked sick, defeated, like a man being led to his execution. Inside, the courtroom was all dark wood and high ceilings, designed to intimidate. Judge Catherine Morrison presided from the bench, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie and excuse imaginable. I'd learned she had a reputation for fairness and an absolute intolerance for fraud. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Marcus. Fernando and Laura sat at the defense table with their attorney, Richard Walsh. I could feel Laura's eyes boring into my back, but I didn't turn around. Loretta sat in the gallery directly behind me, a visible show of support. Judge Morrison reviewed the case file, then looked up. "This is a motion to nullify a property deed transfer on grounds of fraud and invalid notarization. Counselor Chen, you may present your case." Marcus stood, and his voice filled the courtroom with quiet authority. "Your Honor, Mrs. Patricia Hambley was systematically defrauded of her home by her husband and stepdaughter through manipulation, lies, and an illegally notarized document. He presented the original deed showing me as sole owner, then the fraudulent transfer with its invalid notary seal. The notary's license was suspended on July 15th. This deed was allegedly notarized on October 3rd, nearly 3 months later. This notarization never legally occurred. The transfer is void on its face." Then it was my turn to testify. I took the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Marcus guided me through the story, the manipulation at my dining room table, the tax protection lie, signing without independent counsel. I described the exile to the storage room, the $200 allowance, the 8 months of living like a prisoner in my own home. My voice stayed steady, clear, dignified. I didn't cry, though I wanted to. Several people in the gallery looked visibly moved, and I saw one woman wiping her eyes. Walsh, the defense attorney, stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Hambley, isn't it true you signed the papers voluntarily? No one held a gun to your head?" "I signed them because my husband lied to me about what they meant." "But you read the documents before signing?" "I was told they were a formality. I trusted my husband. That trust was betrayed." Walsh tried to suggest I was mentally incompetent, forgetful, confused about dates and details, but I remained composed, answering each question with quiet strength. I had lived through this. I knew every detail intimately. Fernando took the stand next, visibly uncomfortable in his expensive suit. Walsh tried to paint him as a caring husband protecting family assets, but on cross-examination, Marcus dismantled him with surgical precision. "Mr. Mitchell, where did the money come from to purchase the house?" Fernando's voice was barely audible. "Patricia's inheritance and savings? And how much did you contribute to the purchase?" I didn't, but I've maintained it. With whose money, Mr. Mitchell?" Silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any answer. Laura took the stand defiant and angry, claiming she was trying to protect the estate from taxes. But Marcus asked the questions that mattered. Why did you move Mrs. Hambley into a storage room? 8 months is temporary? Why $200 a month while you drove a luxury car paid for with dividends from her property? Laura struggled, contradicted herself, and grew increasingly hostile. It was painful to watch her credibility crumble. Then Marcus called the notary, a nervous man who admitted he'd continued notarizing documents for cash after his license was suspended. "Did you verify Mrs. Hambley's identity or intent?" "No, Mr. Mitchell and Miss Mitchell brought me the papers already signed. I just stamped them." Premeditated fraud. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Marcus even called the manager of the Gilded Lily, who testified about Laura's demand to remove this old woman, and my revelation of having only $10. Judge Morrison's face grew stern as she listened. In closing arguments, Walsh pleaded, "Your Honor, my clients are willing to voluntarily return the property. There's no need for harsh consequences." Marcus's response was devastating. "Your Honor, this was calculated fraud. They stole Miss Hambley's home, exiled her to substandard housing, exploited her financially, and publicly humiliated her. They only offered to return the property because they're caught. Justice demands more than allowing thieves to simply give back what they stole when facing consequences." Judge Morrison removed her glasses and looked directly at Fernando and Laura. "I have reviewed all evidence and testimony. What I see is a clear pattern of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. The notarization was invalid. The transfer is therefore void ab initio. It never legally occurred. The property is hereby declared the sole property of Patricia Hambley." My eyes filled with tears. Loretta's hand found my shoulder from behind. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison continued, "Mr. Fernando Mitchell and Miss Laura Mitchell have 72 hours to vacate the premises. They are ordered to pay Mrs. Hambley $24,000 in restitution. And I am referring this case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges." The gavel fell with a crack that sounded like freedom. I sat motionless, tears streaming down my face. Loretta rushed from the gallery to embrace me. Marcus simply said, "You did it. You got your home back." Outside, facing camera flashes, a reporter asked me how I felt. I feel like justice has been served. I hope my story helps other people who've been exploited by those they trusted. That evening, I held the court order in my hands, the legal document declaring me the rightful owner. Loretta raised a glass of champagne. To justice, to dignity, to new beginnings. I raised mine too. To home.
The 72 hours felt like 72 years. I stayed at Loretta's house, pacing her living room, checking my phone obsessively, even though there was no one I expected to call. Marcus had warned me the night after the verdict. Some people, when they're angry, will cause damage out of spite. Be prepared for the worst. Loretta squeezed my hand. Whatever they've done, we'll fix it together. On the third day, we arrived at the house at 9 a.m. Loretta, Marcus, and me. Fernando's car was gone. Laura's car was gone. The driveway sat empty, the house silent against the morning sky. My hands shook as I pulled out my key, suddenly terrified it wouldn't work, that they'd change the locks in one final act of cruelty. But the key turned. The door opened, and I stepped into my home for the first time in 8 months as its rightful owner. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not peaceful, but hollow, like the inside of a drum. The second thing was the emptiness. They had stripped the house bare. The living room where I'd imagined hosting holiday dinners stood vacant, rectangles of darker hardwood showing where furniture had protected the floor from sunlight. The dining room table, my mother's table, was gone. Even the curtain rods had been removed, leaving bare windows that let harsh light stream across empty rooms. I walked through each space in stunned silence. In the kitchen, cabinets hung open and empty, a few broken dishes left in the sink like a final insult. My personal photographs had been torn from the walls, the frames taken, leaving only nail holes and rectangles of unfaded paint. In the master bedroom, even the light fixtures had been removed, wires hanging from the ceiling like severed nerves. Loretta's voice was sharp with fury. "This is criminal! They can't do this!" Marcus sighed. "Actually, they can claim it was their personal property. Unless Patricia can prove she owns specific items, it's nearly impossible to prosecute. They know that." We walked out back to the converted storage room. Inside, everything remained exactly as I'd left it. The twin bed with its thin mattress, the cracked mirror, the few possessions I'd accumulated during my exile. The contrast was devastating. They'd taken everything from the main house, but left me with the nothing I'd been living with. I felt something crack inside my chest, but when I walked back outside into the garden, I realized it wasn't despair breaking through, it was something else entirely. The old pecan trees still stood, their branches spreading wide and unchanging. The garden I'd once maintained was overgrown, wild with weeds and volunteer plants, but alive. I walked to the largest tree, the one that had been here longer than I had, and touched its rough bark with my palm. The texture was familiar, solid, real. I turned back to Loretta and Marcus and found my voice stronger than it had been in months. They took the furniture, they took the decorations, they took everything they could carry. Tears ran down my face, but I was smiling. But they couldn't take the house itself. They couldn't take the land, they couldn't take the structure I bought with my own money. They couldn't take what really matters. Loretta stepped forward and embraced me. "We'll furnish it again. I have extra furniture in storage. Friends who can help. This house will be beautiful again, Patricia. It'll be even better because it'll be truly yours." I pulled back and looked at the empty house, at the bones of what remained. I don't need beautiful. I just need it to be mine. That night, I insisted on staying. Loretta brought air mattresses, basic bedding, a camping stove. We set up in the living room like campers in an enormous tent, 2 women sleeping in an empty house. I lay awake for hours listening to the sounds I'd missed, the familiar creak of the floorboards, the hum of the old heating system kicking on, the wind moving through the pecan trees. These sounds were mine again. I woke at dawn to sunlight streaming through bare windows, unfiltered and clean. I made coffee on the camping stove, the smell filling the empty kitchen, and walked through each room again. This time, I wasn't seeing what was missing. I was seeing what would be. By noon, neighbors started arriving. News of the case had spread through the community. Mrs. Chen from down the street brought a table and chairs. "I was going to donate these anyway," she said, though I suspect that was a kind lie. The Rodriguez family brought kitchen supplies. Dishes, silverware, pots, and pans. Father Matthews from the local church arrived with a group carrying a used couch. He said, "Someone donated this last week. It's yours if you want it." I was overwhelmed by the kindness. by these people I barely knew choosing to help me rebuild. Loretta brought furniture from her storage unit over the next few days. A bed frame, a dresser, a kitchen table, lamps with warm amber shades. She said, "I downsized years ago but couldn't bear to sell these pieces. They're good quality. They deserve a good home." "I can't repay you for all this," I said, tears threatening again. "You're not meant to. This is what people do for each other." Patricia and I spent a week slowly furnishing the house. Everything was simple, modest, nothing like the elegant furniture that had been stolen. But every piece was chosen by me, placed by me, arranged according to my preferences rather than someone else's vision. The house began to feel like a home again, my home, truly mine for the first time. On the 8th day, Loretta arrived with a large box. "I have something for you." Inside was a sewing machine, new and gleaming. "You mentioned you used to sew. I thought maybe you'd like to again." I set a look in the sunroom, in the space where morning light poured through the French doors. I ran my hand over its smooth surface and remembered the woman I'd been before Fernando, before the betrayal, someone who created things, who built a life with her own hands. "Thank you," I whispered, but the words felt inadequate for what she'd given me. Not just a machine, but a future.